It's Wednesday, and that means we're continuing our series examining some of the roadblocks in front of clean energy becoming mainstream. Today, we focus on the consumer and a program in Boulder County that's helped hundreds of homeowners recoup the upfront costs of going solar or making their homes more energy efficient. But as KUNC's Kirk Sigler reports, the popular program that was mimicked by other towns is now in limbo thanks to the quiet actions of the federal government.
A couple years ago now, Boulder County set up its Climate Smart Loan Program. With voter approval, they created an improvement district, which homeowners who wanted to make their houses more efficient or install, say, solar systems could opt into. The county used property tax revenue then to issue bonds to these homeowners to finance the improvements. Local governments do this sort of thing all the time. Think of special taxing districts for sewer or road improvements. But it is pretty new for clean energy, and it's gotten labeled with this wonky acronym PACE, short for Property Assessed Clean Energy Districts.
It's just a fancy term for allowing for easier access to financing for renewable energy and energy-efficient technology.
People like Neil Lurie are huge fans of this. He's executive director of the Boulder-based Colorado Solar Energy Industries Association.
For years, the biggest hurdle for families and businesses to go solar has been the upfront cost.
But for Boulder, in the past year, that hurdle got a lot smaller. The PACE District, or Climate Smart Loan Program, helped 600 people make energy efficiency improvements to their homes. And according to Will Tour, it even made a small dent in the battle against climate change. I met the former mayor and current county commissioner in his office on the Pearl Street Mall.
And it was really like our local stimulus program.
Tour told me that all this home improvement had an enormous trickle-down effect, generating about $10 million to the local economy.
In other places across the state, similar contractors were having to lay people off. Here they were hiring people.
But this all came to a screeching halt in April. That was when the mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac issued a new edict saying they wouldn't buy mortgages that have PACE loans attached to them. This is huge because these two quasi-government firms are the biggest buyers of mortgages on what's often referred to as the secondary market. So when most people in Boulder County and other places buy a home, the bank that has their mortgage will bundle it with others and churn a profit by selling them on the secondary market. This is sort of the aha moment, right? All of these bundled home loans were one of the root problems of the financial crisis. So the federal government has since been cracking down on what mortgage brokers like Fannie and Freddie can and cannot do, and apparently the government isn't so sure about these relatively untested PACE programs. Here's a frustrated Will Tour again.
What we are seeing here is that the actions of these mortgage giants is directly impacting the ability of regular middle-class Americans to participate in the clean energy economy.
So for Tour, this all highlights a bigger problem. If you're poor, you're eligible for energy efficiency subsidies. If you're rich, you can just write a check for the solar panel. But if you're middle class, like the bulk of the country, it's hard to make these upgrades. I'm driving up windy Lee Hill Road north of town to meet someone in this exact position.
We are in North Boulder Heights, and we're approximately 1,800 to 1,900 feet above Boulder.
This is Wayne Dickstein. He's one of 168 homeowners who had planned to be in the third wave of PACE financing until the county decided to postpone the program indefinitely a few weeks ago.
It is an Adobe, yes.
Dickstein had planned to tap PACE funds to insulate this average-size home and install a solar panel on the roof. He tells me that he pays more than $250 a month in utility bills,
which I believe is enough energy to heat 3 houses in Boulder.
That's a lot of money to be paying for a month in utilities.
It's beyond a lot of money, and it's only going to get worse.
Dickstein says he could refinance and take out a second line of credit to pay for the upgrades, but he says the new emerging model of PACE seemed safer and made more sense for him. And like a lot of people, Dickstein isn't sure why Fannie and Freddie, and the federal government for that matter, think it's so risky.
Not that we are going to, but if we ended up getting short on this and leaving, they got a better house too.
This puts the additional credit risk of the energy retrofit loans onto Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac for the mortgages they've bought or guaranteed, increasing taxpayer risk.
So after numerous calls to Washington, I finally heard back from Corinne Russell. She's a spokeswoman for the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which regulates Fannie and Freddie and other federal home loan banks. Now, it's hard to interpret the argument that FHFA is making here, but Russell says it boils down to this. Their concern is that many of these PACE loans are acting as first liens on people's property, out in front of the homeowner's primary mortgage. Regulators say these PACE loans rely on technologies that they think are still unproven. There are no standards yet in place, and the FHFA doesn't want Fannie and Freddie to be left holding the bag if things go wrong. Now, Commissioner Will Tour, who helped develop Boulder's Climate Smart Loan Program, not surprisingly doesn't buy this. He says local governments were creating these types of special taxing districts long before Fannie and Freddie even came to be.
We have been unable to find any logic in their position.
Local leaders like Tour are especially scratching their heads because while federal housing regulators have thrown the PACE program in limbo, the U.S. Department of Energy has actually been supporting it, distributing about $150 million in federal grants to Boulder and other local governments across the country to help get it off the ground. The FHFA did not make someone available to respond to this, and spokeswoman Corinne Russell would only read this prepared statement.
FHFA remains committed to working with other government agencies to develop and implement energy retrofit lending programs with appropriate underwriting guidelines and consumer protection standards.
But in Boulder anyway, some of the Climate Smart program's biggest advocates take this as a sign that a resolution might be found. Remember Neil Lurie from the Solar Group we heard up top? He thinks with enough pressure, the popular program will be resurrected.
We want to make sure we can remove barriers to economic growth rather than just simply putting up more hurdles.
Lurie says the Climate Smart program has shown tremendous promise for massively boosting renewable energy into the mainstream. And he says the solar industry in particular has been one bright spot during this downturn, thanks to it partly. Programs like PACE have contributed to this statistic, he says. 6 years ago, there were only 40 solar companies in Colorado. Now there are more than 400. For KUNC, I'm Kirk Sigler.
Colorado's forests are teeming with renewable energy potential, but the effort to turn beetle-killed pine trees into woody biomass to heat homes or power businesses has been somewhat slow to take off. As part of our Roadblocks to Clean Energy series, KUNC's Brian Larson has more.
Let me start by acknowledging that the jury is still out on whether or not woody biomass should even be classified as a renewable fuel source alongside the likes of wind and solar. That largely depends on which side of the carbon debate you fall on. More on that in a moment. But Colorado is in a unique situation, with millions of acres of beetle-killed pine trees dotting our hillsides and a burgeoning clean energy sector that includes woody biomass in its portfolio.
We all want to do something about the energy crisis. We all want to do something about the environment. We all want to do something about the economy.
Entrepreneur Rosalie Bianco is president of Environmental Energy Partners. She's hoping to address all three of those issues by opening up a series of small mills to convert dead, low-value timber into pellets to fuel the wood stoves and boilers her company is planning to sell. The first mill opens this week along I-70 in Silver Plume. Negotiations to open a second are also underway in Breckenridge.
It's where the need is, and the way we are building our mills, we're building them in a movable and soon-to-be mobile type of fashion. When I talk about where the need is, I want to get closer to the fiber.
And Summit County is a good choice because it's pretty much ground zero for the bark beetle epidemic. It's what lured Mark Mathis in neighboring Grand County to open his large-scale pellet plant 2 years ago. While his Confluence Energy company couldn't keep up with orders back in 2008, lower energy prices, too much supply, and a tough economy hurt business in late 2009 and earlier this year.
That was one of the saddest days of my life. I mean, it literally brought tears to my eyes, having to lay off the workers that had been here and were excited about what the future of this place was.
Mathis owed thousands of dollars to the logging companies that he contracted with, and then his bank cut off his line of credit. But just a few months after those layoffs, orders are starting to return. He's been able to rehire half of the production staff, and the plant is producing about 250 tons of pellets per day. This up-and-down roller coaster ride is an all-too-familiar story for many small business owners. But Mathis doesn't think it should be this way when you're creating an alternative fuel source.
It amazes me every day to see the ships traveling through the Gulf of Mexico, filled with wood pellets that are made in this country, through the Gulf, across the Atlantic Ocean, and then it's used to generate electricity in Europe. And it goes right through the oil slick to get there. And then the same or different ship comes right through with importing oil.
Mathis says the biggest roadblock to getting people to convert over to woody biomass is the cost to the consumer. People go back to their old habits easily when prices for fossil fuels are low. Remember when the price of gasoline went over $4 a gallon? Another hurdle for the industry and startup companies like Rosalie Bianco's is there's no federal support for biomass, unlike wind, solar, and ethanol.
As an industry, we're having a problem getting on the books to say either subsidize no one or subsidize everyone. But you can't take one industry and say we're not going to subsidize, and that's basically what's happening here.
And then there's that pesky carbon issue to grapple with. Because it's burned, some don't think biomass is all that carbon neutral. At least that was one of the conclusions from a recent 6-month study by the Manomet Center for Conservation in Massachusetts. Team leader and resource economist Tom Walker says a lot of carbon goes up into the atmosphere initially when compared to burning coal or natural gas. But forests also grow back, and he says those trees will eventually trap carbon pollution.
Over time, there is an effect of it being resequestered, and ultimately it can yield benefits in terms of lower atmospheric net carbon emissions than you would have had you burned fossil fuel.
The only problem is those results could take between 5 and 30 years to be fully realized. It's a timeline that some skeptics of biomass say is too long and too unsustainable to build an industry around, and perhaps so. Nevertheless, Rosalie Bianco has already invested millions of dollars into her company, but has yet to commercially produce any product.
It just makes sense for us to take this biomass and to utilize this biomass so that the carbon that is going to naturally go in the air anyway goes in the air and replaces some sort of fossil fuel.
And back in Kremling, Mark Mathis is still cautiously watching his bottom line.
Things are going to be tight until we get into that heating season, which is virtually here. We're about another 30 days from really being into that ordering and shipping period, which we will easily make at this point. But yeah, it's been a struggle.
He's also worked out an arrangement to ship his pellets by rail this year to save a few more dollars, and a deal may be in the works with the U.S. Forest Service to obtain his raw material without any cost to taxpayers. But through a cracked smile, Mathis would only say that the details on that are still pending. For KUNC, I'm Brian Larson.